The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, good morning, America, and welcome to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. It's Tuesday morning, January 8th. And we are kicking off our new year with another great program. Today we're going to be reopening and discussing 9/11 and the events of the Twin Towers and Building 7 collapse at the World Trade Center. And we will be talking in the first hour with Eric Lawyer, who is the founder of firefighters and emergency workers for 9/11 Truth. We also have a gentleman on by the name of Christopher Life, who will be also contributing to the first hour. The second hour is going to be challenging because we've got 4 guests coming on for the second hour. And that will be Richard Gage, the head of and the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and his legal team, who have filed a petition that has been accepted by the U.S. Attorney for the state of New York, or for New York City, to empanel a grand jury to reopen and investigate the events around 9/11. What a powerful program this promises to be. And so we are going to really start discussing probably one of the most important events in our nation's history and the reasons that we are so concerned because of all the freedoms that we've lost as a result of what happened on 9/11. So with that, Eric, welcome to the radio program, and Christopher, welcome. And I would like to start this discussion with you gentlemen because I think we recognize that the events of 9/11 created some unintended consequences that we're seeing even today, 18 years later. And really, in truth, 9/11 did more to take away our freedoms under our Constitution through the Patriot Act than any other single event in our nation's history. We literally wiped out the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, and we impacted many of the other the other parts of our Constitution, rule of law. So with that, Eric, welcome to the show, and I think let's start this discussion on just exactly what we've lost as a result of what happened on 9/11.
Thank you, Dan. Excuse me. It's an honor to be here. And, starting with what we lost. Well, I'd say we lost our innocence in a way. For myself, I can speak. Before 9/11, I felt like I had the world kind of figured out, and I had a kind of a belief system that seemed to be working for me. And when 9/11 happened, it kind of blew that completely wide open. So with that loss of innocence came, for me, and I know a lot of my brothers and sisters, came a lot of fear. And in that place of fear, that shock and awe that they talked about, I really gave away my power, and I was willing to make sacrifices. Like the Patriot Act, I almost believed in it. There's parts of me that were saying, no, it's not good. But what I realize now is what we gave away was our power as the people. We kind of said we transferred that capacity that we had to stand, together, and we gave it to a kind of blindly to an authority we didn't understand. And now we're seeing the ramifications of that, whether it's, simple things like the airport, traveling through TSA, or the Patriot Act, where you can be, there's the renditions and torture and all the different things that have been legalized. We've really, in one way, gone backwards, but I also believe 9/11 has been a big wake-up call for a lot of us. So I'll stop there, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Dan.
Well, you're quite welcome, Eric, and I have to say that to me, the actual day that 9/11 happened was kind of a wake-up call for me, because I had actually studied in a structures class when I was in school the construction of the Twin Towers, and one of the things that stood out is that the Twin Towers were designed with basically enough steel and concrete in those structures to handle 2 times the impacts that the single jet plane administered to the building without any impact to the structure itself. And when those buildings were designed, they were designed to take multiple hits by Boeing 707s, which were the largest commercial aircraft at the time. And when those buildings collapsed the way they did, I told my wife, I can't believe those buildings collapsed like that. There's going to be lawsuits coming out the ears on this thing, because those buildings were designed to handle a much more impact than they actually had with the single jet plane. And it was obvious to me that the buildings were burning at a low temperature because of the black smoke that was coming out of them. It was interesting because I carried a lot of those thoughts with me for a long time, and then I met Richard Gage in, I believe it was 2008 or 2009. He came to Montana, to Bozeman, and did a program at the university on 9/11 truth. And that's where I, for the first time, saw that there were professional people that understood structure and buildings that felt the same way I did. So thank you for being on the show. What I want to do is I want to set the table for the second hour by talking about all the things that we've lost and how 9/11 impacted so many of our institutions and our laws in this country. Let's do that. Christopher, I've never met you. I only know you through action by Eric, but I know that you're also very involved in this movement. And all I can say is that we need to reaffirm our liberty. We need to reaffirm what is so important about our country, and we've lost many of those things through the impacts of the events of 9/11. And we need to expose the deception, and we need to open the truth, and we need to return to what our founding fathers believed was important, which is individual liberty and the rights under our Constitution. I'll let either one of you gentlemen carry it from there.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. Thank you so much for having me on the show as well, and greetings to all the listeners. I really agree with the last thing you just said there. And in that regard, I think it's important to even zoom out the lens further beyond just looking at 9/11 and realize that that there is in place, and has been in place for a long time, systematic plan to deteriorate the civil rights of Americans. And so we then can ask the question of, okay, what's the bigger zoomed out perspective, and where has this been heading, and where is it still heading? And in that, I think it gives a new lens around 9/11 to look at. I was actually chatting with Eric for a couple minutes yesterday, and we were kind of talking about this notion that sometimes our toxins can be our medicine. And what that means is that these events, while they are clearly progressing a particular agenda, they also give us the opportunity as American citizens to wake up and to be able to realize what we have been allowing to occur and what will continue to occur unless we begin to organize and coordinate with a very high level of intensity and some degree of I use the word radicalism, but I use that word very, very intentionally, because something like armed conflict is very radical. Something like what occurred in 9/11 is very radical. And so what is our nonviolent response that meets that same level of radicalism? Because if certain powers that be are willing to be extremely radical to express their priorities, but we are, for the most part, staying comfortable in our homes, on our couches, looking at our TVs, then one side will always outperform the other. And so my invitation, to all of America is to rise up in a higher level of coordination. Martin Luther King says we need to organize for peace as much as those who love war organize. And so what does that really look like? And One Nation as a new political vehicle is an answer to that question, and an invitation for every American who really is ready to rebirth the essence and the principles of the founding of this country, the Constitution, and rebirth those principles into the world today and ensure that we create a future defined by them. I think that everything about 9/11 gives us an opportunity to have that very real, very sobering conversation and decide how we want to be going forward.
Well, Christopher, you hit exactly on what 9/11 has really done, and that's accelerated a program that's been going on for really over 100 years, and that is the destruction of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and the melding of the United States into a one-world socialist, Marxist, and I like to call it a techno-feudalism world government that is controlled by an oligarchy of a very few people, and that they control every aspect of our lives. And that's been happening in so many different directions. And 9/11 was really an event that was kind of a catalyst to try to really accelerate a lot of those programs. Eric, I know you feel the same way. Let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Christopher. I just love the way you articulated that. My opinion is it's like the place where I'm at now. Initially, after 9/11, I was all about blaming the terrorists that I was told. And I wasn't like you, Dan, where you saw it right away. I was, in the fire service, and I went out there to ground zero. So I was kind of really sucked into that whole anger, just that energy of like, we've got to destroy the Middle East. And then I had my awakening into 9/11 truth. And when that happened, I now shifted my anger towards the oligarchs and the shadow government, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And what I've learned later since that is like by me directing my anger and wanting to destroy those two parties, I was I was being a victim. I was saying, hey, here's a group of people, whether it's terrorists or the shadow government, that has attacked my country, and I want to destroy them. And that's the solution. And what I had to step into, what's kind of unfolded, is now seeing what is my responsibility. And the analogy I like to use is, it's like handing the keys. Like our government was, the founding fathers created something, that we all know was revolutionary and beautiful. And it's been a vehicle that's been the beacon on the hill. And we, the people, had a very clear responsibility in that government. We had duties. We had rights, but we also had duties. We have forgotten that we had duties. And so because of that, it's like we've handed the keys to a 5-year-old of a Maserati, say. We've handed the keys to a 5-year-old. We, the people, have. And we've stayed in our office staying busy or watching TV, like Christopher mentioned. It's like, and we've told the people that we've put in office, be safe, do what's in our best interest, drive that car safely, and we're going to be in here doing our own thing. And now we're pissed because they've driven that thing into a wall, basically. So it's like where I'm really stepping into now, and that's one of the reasons I invited Christopher here, is because he modeled it so beautifully, is 9/11, yes, we have lost a ton, but at the same time, it's made so many of us rise up into our true power and our purpose. And that's, where my focus is now is how, especially with what's happening now in your second hour, which I'm so excited about. And, you can share more about that, Dan. But with this grand jury petition, what's so exciting is there's an opening, and people, it's like it's time, it's ready. But I want to kind of really ground something, or be careful here, because it's our moment of choice. And what I mean by this is when I came into 9/11 Truth originally, when I had a lot of insiders that reached out to me because I was representing firefighters that were really amazing men, and they guided me in the beginning. And one of them had said something. He said, he's like, Eric, this started long before 9/11, like Christopher and you both mentioned. He said, but I want you to remember something. 9/11 is going to be the portal. It's going to be the thing that really wakes people up. And he said that moment of truth is going to come, and where the world's ready for it. And he said that's going to be our moment of choice. And he said in that moment we can choose to be off with our heads, blame the people that are in a system that we've let go, we've kind of stepped away from, and blame the people that are in there now. Or we can do it differently, and we can rise up in an entirely new way. And that's really where I'm excited. And the reason why I invited Christopher is with One Nation. He's representing a new political party that's been building alliances kind of quietly at first, and it's going to be coming out here in a larger way. But with this new grand jury petition, we're going to see more and more 9/11 and other incidents too, like the pedophilia, a lot of different things. We're going to see an opening. And what we need is we have our current political system. It's too hard to radically just build a new one right now, but we do need a third party, because those two current parties are so entrenched and co-opted, controlled, hijacked, whatever you want to call it. I don't think we're going to see what we want to see through that. So I think we need a new way where we rise up from a place of love and compassion, but a fierce love, where we own our pieces in this and we rise up together. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Well, that's a point well taken. We have allowed what's happened to our country to happen because we've been so, let's say, so lulled into a sense of someone else doing the work for us. We've been lulled into the idea that we have two political parties, when in fact I think we have one political party that takes turns playing good cop, bad cop, meanwhile moving us very quickly into their one world, new world order, one world socialist government. And what we need to do is not be destructive, not be vicious about this, although I think the people that have been involved in this need to be accountable. There's no question about that. But we also need to make sure that we don't use their technique, which is destruction. And quite honestly, I think it's a battle between good and evil, between Christianity and Bible principles, as well as people who believe in Satanism. And I don't want to get too preachy on that, but the bottom line is that we are in a battle of good and evil, and we cannot fight evil by being evil. We have to do it by doing it the right way, which is educate and explain and get people to wake up to the reality of the world we live in. Christopher, I'd love to hear your comment on that.
Fascinating conversation. I love that you brought in principles of Christianity, and if we really look at words of Jesus around turn the other cheek, and if your coat is stolen, then give them your cloak also. What does that actually mean in this context? And I really appreciate where Eric's taking this conversation, that we have a choice to blame, or we have a choice to simply rise up in our awareness and our personal responsibility to pick back up those duties and that civic responsibility as American citizens. And to me, there's just no question in my mind that we have to take that path. There's no end to blame, and there's no end to fear. And so if we choose this opportunity to point fingers and blame, again, I agree with you about the accountability. I love that this trial has been approved. It feels like a massive opening. I don't know how it's gonna transpire and exactly what the results will be, but it feels very promising that this is occurring, and I'm grateful for those who are behind that effort. But again, just reinforcing, we have an opportunity to point fingers or to become generative, and I think that every single person is going to be able to have to make that choice in their own hearts and their own minds. And again, I don't mean to belabor or over-promote one nation, but one nation party is a container and a context for those who are ready to be generative, who are ready to be productive and responsible, to pick back up the civic responsibilities, to be able to connect and gather and build a platform that we can use to decide who our mayors are, who our sheriffs are, who our governors are, who our state reps are, who our national reps are, and what laws we are looking at, analyzing, taking down or building up as we go forward into building the new future. And so can't reinforce enough how it is important for every person to take stock and realize, what it feels like to feel the inspiration of the Revolutionary War, of the Founding Fathers, of these founding documents of America that have made this promise of liberty. What that feels like, and as I say, I can feel that inspiration welling up in my chest, that pride to be a part of this great experiment away from monarchy and into something new. And then what does it look like for us to carry that feeling into the world to ensure that we are generators of our own liberty and the liberty of those around us by taking a stand, by waking each other up, by linking arms, and by taking responsibility to lead this country into the future.
Well, and with that understanding, we need to recognize that the people behind these schemes to create world government plan on literally controlling the entire world. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that the rest of the world has the same message of liberty, because I believe we have a unique opportunity to not only throw out the chains of these people that believe in globalism and a one-world techno-feudalist government, but I believe we also have an opportunity here to the entire world to the kind of freedom that we were founded under, which is the rights of the individual, and making sure that people understand that they are accountable. There's no free lunch. Accountable. They need to take care of their own wiki-up. They need to be involved. That isn't to say that we can't be kind to our neighbors and we can't care for those who can't care for themselves, but it has to be a voluntary effort, and it can't be by government. It has to be by individuals.
Yeah. When we look back at the founding of this country and some of the profound philosophers and thought leaders of this nation, I think the core keeps coming back down to this concept of human individuality or human sovereignty, and that ultimately the republic stays intact if each individual lives with that level of responsibility that you're talking about, and the republic starts to be able to be captured by other interests when we sidestep that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we with liberty there is also responsibility. And so we need to understand that, and we need to get back to getting off our derrieres and being part of the solution and not just part of the problem. And the way we do that is by being involved and by learning as much as we can and getting back to the core principles that our country was founded on, which is individual responsibility and individual liberty. And that's something that was so unique in the world. And we lost much of that over the last century and a half, actually, since the Civil War, really. But in reality, over the last more than a century, it's been happening. And it's time that we reclaim those rights.
Yeah. There was something that you said earlier about it's important for us to take responsibility and also to take care of each other. And I think that one of the most divisive tactics that's occurred in this duopoly that you mentioned before, kind of two different parties or one party that kind of takes turns playing good cop and bad cop, is that some of the beauty of personal responsibility and of taking care of each other has been kind of cut in half and thrown onto two sides of this bifurcated, engineered ideological spectrum. And what I mean by that is if the historic right or the Republicans say responsibility and liberty at all costs and everyone's out for themselves, then half of America who really thinks that we should be taking care of each other say, I can't get along with that. I need to identify with we got to take care of each other, even if it means that we might give up some of our personal liberty and responsibility. And the half of America that really thinks that personal responsibility and liberty are the priority say, I can't get aligned with that, and so I'm willing to maybe not take care of each other as much and not apply budgets or programs to do that so we can make sure that we stand for the personal responsibility. And I think that actual divisive tactic, I don't think anyone's really talking about it, but it's been massively impactful to leading people to bucket themselves on one side or another of this ideological divide. And so what does it look like for us to organize such that we integrate the need to take care of each other and the need for personal responsibility so that we don't have to choose one or the other, so that we can look through both of those lenses in our leadership, in our policy, and actually bring them all together. And then also lace in this other element of doing a good job taking care of our land and of our water and of the environment that we live in, and not put personal rights and liberty and responsibility on one side on the right and doing a good job taking care of our land and our water on the other side, as these things are mutually exclusive. They're not in any way mutually exclusive. We must protect personal liberty. We must protect personal responsibility. We must have shared dignity for everyone, and we must do a great job taking care of the environment we live in. All four of these things are design criteria on how we create a better world, not mutually exclusive ideologies we need to fight each other about. And this is a trick that's been played upon us, and we need to wake up and realize, hey, it's time for us to not play any of those ideological games that have been given to us, right? The political and narrative warfare that has really controlled how we think about these topics, and use our own common sense and rise up to decide what type of future we want to create together.
Yeah, it's understandable that a lot of people, are concerned about our environment. But the truth is, I grew up in the rural part of Montana, and I come from farm stock, farming and ranching, and the best stewards that I knew were the people that actually lived on the land. And if anyone ever wants to see how government control of natural resources and the environment works, they need to go to the former Soviet Union, which is now the Russian Republic, but also the Eastern Bloc countries that were part of the Stalin movement into Eastern Europe, and take a look at how they manage their resources compared to West Germany. I've been on the border, and I've actually seen where the Soviets did the forestry their way, which was clear-cut and just mangle everything, and how the West Germans have been managing their forests for hundreds of years. And what a difference, because one is based on government control of environmentalism, and the other is based on personal responsibility and that good old-fashioned self-interest. And self-interest usually trumps every time government control, because self-interest also says you want to make sure that you manage your resources in a way that you can continue to profit from them down the road.
Yeah, I love this conversation, and where it's like the personal responsibility. When we really step into that fully, we are going to take care of ourselves, each other, and the environment. And
right.
I mean, that's really what it is. Otherwise, it's not personal responsibility. And what you're bringing up, Dan, about government isn't the answer, or the thing. That resonates deeply with me. And one of the things that Christopher's helped me see which has really been like, oh yeah, it's like that analogy of giving the keys to a car. At this moment, we have given the keys to another, to these powers that be, and instead of trying to say that's not the answer and fight it, like one of the things the intelligence guy told me, he's seen so many like just pearls of wisdom. And
Eric, I hate to stop you on that thought, because we need to pick it up on the other side of the break.
Okay.
But hold that thought, and we'll pick it up on the other side.
Perfect.
This is The Micro Effect.
www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today my guests are Eric Lawyer and Christopher Life, and I want to let Eric go ahead and continue through your thoughts, Eric, because you were saying some things that I think are very important.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so we were just kind of bringing it back to personal responsibility versus government power, and that kind of the tension between those two. And so I'm bringing back in the wisdom from the intelligence officer that really spent a lot of time with me in the beginning of my 9/11 truth days, and he basically, he retired early from the intelligence world because he said he thought he was actually representing the interests of the United States of America, and the deeper he got into it, the more he realized he was actually representing the interests of a very few select, people and or businesses. And so he helped me see, said, you've got to be very careful when you're taking a stand for something, because if you're going to be against it, he said, you're going to be controlled all day long. And when I talked about the CIA and stuff, and he said, what most people don't understand is the CIA does not infiltrate its enemies. He said, we become the enemy. We plant the enemy. And he goes, that's so that we can control it. And so we sense where the energy is, what people are against. We aggregate or agitate that energy, and then we insert who we think will be the solution. That's kind of how they've operated. And so with that, you've mentioned before too, Dan, I know the world police. And so it's like I've had this resistance to stepping back into our own government in a way, because I thought like, hey, it's too big, it's too powerful, it's not what I want to support. But what the One Nation Party is bringing in is it's reclaiming and acknowledging, yes, we have, it has grown. We have given away our power. It has become the world police. We are not living by example or embodiment. We're actually telling others what to do with force. And that's not what I want. But what I do want is where America becomes that beacon again, where we are the living embodiment, the example of what the integration of personal responsibility and taking care of one another really is. And one of the ways I believe we have to do that is to fully own where we're at. And that is, we do have a government that's a bipolar party system that, like you said, is just a good cop, bad cop. And we need to break that trance, because I think that's going to be an easier way than trying to just abolish the government completely, which, I don't think is going to happen without violence or a lot of chaos. And so it's like, what would it look like? And that's where my curiosity goes, is if we own all the different elements, like the current system, the political system, the justice system, and I'll finish with this, like one of the parties, like just like Christopher here is bringing in a political party, another person that I've connected to has really holding the flag for an entirely new type of justice. And that justice is what's called unitive justice. And right now we have a punitive system, which is an eye for an eye, and that's from the Old Testament. So it's like, how do we make this transition, like in a graceful way, acknowledging where we're at, owning all the pieces, and really almost stepping into the heart of the beast to rise in a new way together?
You bring up the political party thing, and, the fact is, the reason that our government has become so polarized and so incredibly powerful is that we've allowed ourselves to get away from the concept of electing statesmen to collecting or electing candidates, and they have become part of a two-party system. I have a good friend here in Montana who's been on my radio show, and we've talked about eliminating political parties altogether and allowing individual candidates to run on their merits and have nothing to do with any established political party. The two-party system will fight that tooth and nail, because they say, well, we can't do it unless we've got all this money, we've got all this power. Well, the truth is I think what we're seeing today with the Trump administration is a perfect example of how really a third party could be effective, because in truth, even though Trump ran as a Republican, he's kind of a wild card, and I think the reason that both established parties are fighting him so hard is because he stands against the New World Order. He stands for a responsible constitutional Republican form of government. He stands for national sovereignty, and they hate that because both parties have been moving us ever so subtly and now very, very quickly into a one-world socialist government. And he stands as opposition to that. And I think that's why they detest him so much, and they are fighting so hard to try to remove him from office or marginalize everything he does. Christopher, I left that one kind of open because I thought you'd like to jump in on the independent third party idea.
Yeah. Well, to talk about this all day long, Dan, and great for some more space to do so. In order for us to enact the change that we want to see in the world, I think that we have to really meet the system as it is. And currently, the way that our state ballot process works and the entire system works, that this concept of party organizing is a very relevant context that I think we need to leverage and utilize, despite some of the things that you said before. And let's see. I think that one of the primary words here to really be with is the word capturability, and what does that mean? And the founding fathers of this nation, they created a system that at their sort of beautiful and has the checks and balances in place, and it was their best attempt to avoid the capturability of the nation and the republic that they created from intent beyond the pure intent of the founding of this nation. And we've seen that the nation, despite their best attempts, it's been captured, and it's been migrated from a context to generate deeper freedom and liberty for all to something to maximize extractive profits for few at the cost of oppression and subjugation to many. So that system, it has been captured from its original intent. When you look at the Republican Party, you see that the original intention of the Republican Party was anti-slavery and equality and the rights and the dignities of all people. And those aren't the conversations and narratives that I hear when I listen to the rhetoric out of the right, especially in the media. And so in that regard, you can see how it also has been captured as we're talking on this call. And so what does it actually mean for us to, and the founding fathers, they did their best coming out of the monarchical context of Europe, and they did a phenomenal job. And so now we have an opportunity, like them, to say, okay, great, what have we learned in the last 300 years running this experiment of democracy and a context that parties have arisen into to play a role in the democracy and the role that interest groups have played and all the different areas where the system has been captured, and every way that the system is vulnerable to capturability, it has been. And that's why we look at and we see that the pharmaceutical industries and medical industries and food industries and education and so many spaces have been captured in order to maximize extractive profits for few. And so when we're talking about the birthing of a new political party or the rebirth of a nation, then we have things available to us, affordances, that weren't available 300 years ago. We have software technology, we have blockchain technology, we have the possible enlightened wielding of artificial intelligence to do massive analysis and accountability holding. We have communication and transportation and a higher level of economic prosperity than was available 300 years ago. So we have a lot of new ingredients to work with, and I think the primary thing we need to be asking is how to create a context for the next 300 years, the next 1,000 years, that integrates all of the lessons of capturability that we've learned in the last 300 years in our government system and our political system, and birth new opportunities, not that aren't perfect, that various groups of various ulterior motives will find ways to even capture the more perfect systems that we create, and then that'll just tee up the next generations to keep finding out. You know, the preamble of the Constitution says, in order to create a more perfect union, ... So they did that. They absolutely created a more perfect union than had existed before, and so now it's our turn to create a more. It's our kind of turn on that cycle of generations to create more perfect union, and this unit of justice piece that Eric is mentioning, a context of justice where we don't think about an eye for an eye or punishing people or mass incarceration, but we think about actually restoring humanity to every person, regardless of the choices they've made, and create and figure out how to help to make every single person, whether they have or haven't broken a law, be on a track towards personal empowerment and becoming a very generative steward of our nation, and make sure that all our systems are leading to human empowerment, not human incarceration. These are the types of conversations that we get to have right now in order for us to rebirth a more perfect union.
Okay, I agree with what you're saying, Christopher, except for one thing. We aren't a democracy, or we're a republic, and it was always designed to be that way, because democracy basically is mob rule, and that's what's led us into this collectivist thinking. Now, one of the things that I'll bring up, and I want you and Eric to talk about this, but our system of government by the founders was designed where God was our sovereign, but the individual, the rights of the individual were sovereign over local government, which was next in line, and then local government would cede a certain amount of their power to state government, which would be next in line, and then they would give part of their power to a national government, which was always intended to be at the very bottom of the power scale, so that the rights of the individual and local decision making was always at the pinnacle of power. And the reason they did that is because they realized that some states were going to have a bigger population, and so they wanted to make sure that those states could not control the states with less population and control local decision making. And the reason they did that, and that's why they instituted the idea of a local government being, the primary beneficiary of power. And it was designed to keep everything, all decision making, local. And it was designed to make sure that the people who lived on the land and lived within the communities had more control over their lives. And that was a pretty clear idea, because in reality, when you start handing that power over to bigger and bigger government, those decisions go further and further away from the individual and more into a collectivist type of thinking. Eric, what do you think?
Yes, I love that. And that's, just to use an analogy, that's what's happened with the fire service. So the fire service actually operates that same way, where the individual firefighter on the scene has the right to stop an operation if they don't feel safe or feel someone else isn't safe. And it goes all the way up toward the local, to the regional, and then state and national. And we use a coordination system that's called the Incident Command System that was created back initially in the 60s, and it's been developing. And what's happened post 9/11 is FEMA has stepped in and inverted that. So in a way, our country, as we've talked about before, Dan, and a lot of your listeners know, when the United States became a corporation and with DC and all that, it inverted the power system. And so that's what Christopher, I think, is talking about too, being captured. So in a way, something that had the more perfect union, had a pure essence, has been captured, and almost it's really inverted the exact intention of this. And so where I'm feeling now is, I hear what you're saying, and there's also a quote by Buckminster Fuller that says, "Don't fight the existing reality, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete." And I'm a big believer in that too. And so, what would that new model look like with the new ingredients and all the things we have? But I think it's a both and. So it's like, we can't just step away and make the old government, or what the existing government, wrong and bad, because we were the ones who gave away our power. And yes, the power structure was inverted and it's co-opted now. But if we don't step back into it from a place of love, as we see the existing system has so many resources and has so much power that it almost turns it into a war in a way, where if we're able to step back in with a new level of thinking and a new level of awareness that our current politicians don't have, we can start making that shift. And what's happening on the back end, like what I'm connected to, Christopher and many others are, is there are incredible groups that are building entirely new systems of governance, of justice, of food distribution, food growth. That's more what you talked about, Dan, of this individual steward. So it's going back to the local level. I see that happening, but at the same time, we have a behemoth government that is, crushing efforts. And so what feels responsible to me is to own both. And I see it as like it's a birthing, like midwifing the new systems. At the same time, we're hospicing the old. And if we just leave the existing system as it is without us stepping back into it in a new way, it's like a violent death in a way. And I think we can step into this in a responsible way with compassion and love and an understanding of how we all got here. And we can help that old system relax and die gracefully and peacefully and honor for the things it has shown us and taught us. And that's really, and that's the last thing I'll finish with is what that intelligence officer I talked about, how he said if you stand for what you're against, you're going to be controlled all day long. But he said if you identify what you're for, whether it's in the system or out of the system, and you step back in from a place of love and compassion, he's like, you can't be controlled. If you're aware and you're loving and compassionate, there is no control.
Well, I fully agree with that. And, really what it boils down to is that we need to empower ourselves with the whole idea of what our founders brilliantly put together, and that is that the sovereign is the individual, and that we need to start thinking in those terms and thinking of local government is more powerful than state and state government more powerful than national government, and get back to what our founders envisioned. That's the reason we have the Electoral College, is so that 2 senators represent every state, and they were, before the 17th Amendment, they were actually appointed by state legislatures to represent the state. And the 17th Amendment took that power away from the state legislatures and put it into the hands of the electorate, and I don't think that's a good thing. Frankly, I thought that the state legislatures, when senators represented the state more directly and not just another elected official, they did a better job. So we need to get back to local government, and 9/11 really moved us even further toward globalism. Christopher, do you want to have a last thought on this before we break?
Well, Dan, I just want to really agree with these last statements you're making, and I just couldn't agree more in that framework between, God, divinity, that source of life as a primary sovereign, and kind of going from that space and returning that original intent. I think you're spot on. And just kind of before we're out, if there's anybody who's listening who would like to get more involved, just want to create a distinction that there's a political party in Australia called One Nation. So if you've done some searching, you'll likely come across them. We have a fairly young online presence. But if you want to go to the website onenation.party and put in your email address, then we can stay in touch that way. So that's onenation.party.
Okay, well, thank you both gentlemen for being our guests on this first hour, and we will pick up on the other side of the break with our second set of guests. And thank you, gentlemen. I look forward to the next time we speak.
This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls the string.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. In the second hour, we are going to be talking with Richard Gage and a team of attorneys who have been assembled to create a grand jury investigation of the 9/11 event, and that lawyers committee is called LC 911, and they actually sent a petition to the U.S. Attorney for the state of New York. It's Jeffrey Berman, and he responded and said in November that he was going to empanel a grand jury to investigate the events surrounding 9/11. And what wonderful news, because we all know that so much has happened, as we talked about in the last hour. So much has happened in the direction of our country as a result of the events of 9/11. And we need to know, we need to understand what exactly caused those events to happen. So please welcome our guests to the show. I have Richard Gage, David Wrinkle, Barbara Honegger, and Bill Jacoby are the three attorneys who are representing the 9/11 Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth petition to the U.S. Attorney. And also Richard Gage is the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He is a San Francisco Bay Area architect and member of the American Institute of Architects. He is the guy that started this whole movement, and he's been an architect for 28 years. I know Richard personally, and he is a gentleman who is very, very credible and has done a terrific job. So with that, welcome to the show. I'm not sure who is on right now, but please feel welcome to start the conversation.
Thank you, Dan. This is Dave Wrinkle, Lawyers Committee President. And just to clarify what this grand jury petition is, as you mentioned, the crimes of 9/11 are quite extensive. And this petition only addresses the crimes, the bombing crimes involved in New York City at the World Trade Center complex. So the evidence there, it has to do with bombs, explosions, and controlled demolition. And this evidence is new, at least to the public, in the sense that there is credibility now to examine another hypothesis. And the main hypothesis the government has worked with for the last 17 years was office fires. Now, Richard will explain to you why office fires can't bring down high-rise steel-structured buildings and never have. But just as a point of clarification, this is an investigation just directed at the high-rises in New York City and basically another theory of their destruction, and hopefully, well, an investigation, at least according to the law that the U.S. Attorney is working on, to go into the facts presented to him by the Lawyers Committee and the exhibits. Now, the exhibits are 57 exhibits, and your audience can access them if they go on the website lc4for911.org. And they can read the petition, and they can also view the exhibits. And now these exhibits and the petition, as our understanding, will be presented to the grand jurors for their review.
Okay, excellent. Now, when you petitioned, would you tell our listeners a little bit about the process, how you got involved, and a little bit about the process of approaching Jeffrey Berman and trying to empanel a grand jury?
Right. I think everyone has a different background as to how they got involved. My original background was as a police officer. I'm an attorney now. And there's just certain things that weren't done that police would do, certain protocol not followed. But the process is that a number of attorneys who were dissatisfied with the official story, and most of us aware of the good work that architects and engineers did, we decided to address this problem and look at the law that would allow us to do so. So in 18 U.S.C. 3332, it's a statute which requires, it's not discretionary on the part of the U.S. Attorney, that when they get reasonable evidence, they have to call a special grand jury and basically relay our submissions to them. So basically what we did is we actually went to the U.S. Attorney's office and presented them up there in New York City. We did so on April the 10th, and we also followed it up. At that time, the main crimes that we were addressing was federal law criminalizing bombings of places of public use and government facilities. On July 30th, we decided that we needed to make it a little stronger and more complete, and we added 3 additional crimes: federal law criminalizing acts of terrorism transcending national boundaries, federal law criminalizing providing support to terrorists, and federal law criminalizing the killing of a federal government agent or employee. And all these federal laws also have a sub-count of aiding and abetting or conspiracy. So that's basically the laws that we had directed them to, and that's all covered under this 18 U.S.C. 3332, which allows a grand jury to be impaneled. Now, a grand jury consists of 23 lay people. They will meet, and all these proceedings will be done in secret. And they will be convening for up to 18 months, and there's going to be an extension on that. So that's a little bit of the background.
Okay, good. Well, it sounds like Richard Gage and Barbara Honegger are on the call. We're a bit technically challenged this morning because of all the, we normally don't have more than 2 guests on at one time. And we're trying to figure out a way to get all 4 guests on. But in any case, Richard, you're on the call as well. And we've had so many good discussions about this. As you know, I've been virtually the whole time that since the Twin Towers and Building 7 collapsed, because it didn't make any sense to me as a Class A unlimited builder with an architectural background. Tell our listeners how you got this whole process going and how it is finally generated into this attempt to empanel a grand jury, and it sounds like it's almost a fait accompli at this point.
It's happening, Dan. For 12 years, I and the architects and engineers that I've been working with and our incredible staff at AE 911 Truth, we've assembled 3,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation of the destruction of all 3 of these World Trade Center skyscrapers. And it has been a long haul because people tend not to want to wake up and believe anything that they haven't seen already on CNN. And unfortunately, we have not heard on CNN what the grand jurors are going to hear in the coming year. And what they're going to hear, first of all, is about World Trade Center Building 7. Now, this is the third worst structural failure in modern history. The third skyscraper that collapsed on 9/11, it came down in 7 seconds after witnesses heard explosions. Now, here's a building that did not get hit by a plane, and yet it dropped in the afternoon of 9/11 at free fall acceleration straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. So it falls as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. This can only happen if you remove all 80 columns synchronistically timed floor by floor on each floor. So that can only happen with controlled demolition, not by fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, which came out in a report by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, 7 years later. So this is direct evidence of explosive destruction in and of itself, and should be alone a reason for a complete new reinvestigation of 9/11. So when the jurors start out with this information, they're going to have to deal with the reality of explosive demolition being also a possibility at the Twin Towers. And that's exactly what we see, because among the 57 exhibits submitted by the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry, we have the 118 first responders who are witnesses of explosions before the building collapsed. This is absolutely essential. In fact, it happened, there are explosions before the planes even hit the towers. This is very well documented by employees in the building and by the seismic evidence, which is very clear. So the jurors are going to see all of that evidence. In fact, these first responders are talking about, like a belt, all these explosions all the way around the building. And so what we're told by NIST is that the upper part of the towers, the Twin Towers above the point of jet plane impacts, drove the rest of the building down to the ground. But that's not what happens whatsoever. It's destroyed itself in the first 4 seconds. After that, there's additional explosions hurling 4-ton structural steel sections at 80 miles an hour, landing laterally, ejected laterally, landing 600 feet in every direction. This is high-energy explosives at work in this case. And then the building drops in each of them in less than 12 seconds, completely shattering the structural steel frame and it being hurled outside the footprint. The concrete floors, of which there's 110 in each of these buildings, we would expect in a gravitational collapse to be stacked up at the bottom. Each of these are an acre in size, and yet we don't see 50, we don't see 10, we don't see one of these floors at the bottom of this pile. Only a 2-story pile of miscellaneous columns and metal and so forth. Where did the concrete go? Well, it's pulverized in midair. That's exactly what's happening with high-energy explosives. Can only be the cause here. So we have the 90,000 tons of concrete, which is pulverized and distributed in a 3-square-mile area outside the perimeter of the building. The steel is distributed outside the perimeter of the building. That's 2/3 of the weight of these buildings. What's left to crush the building? At any rate, much less near free-fall acceleration. So when we get into the evidence of incendiaries, which is plentiful, the jurors are just going to be overwhelmed with irrefutable scientific forensic evidence here, because you have small red-gray chips, up to 10 tons of them, found by an independent team of scientists that are not paint as they thought they were originally, but what they document in the 25-page peer-reviewed paper is that these are high-tech incendiary, super thermite, is what it really is, with nanoparticles of iron oxide and aluminum powder. When they put these chips in a heater, they ignite, producing what? They produce spheres, molten iron microspheres, the same molten iron microspheres that are found by the U.S. Geological Survey in all of the toxicological study samples that they have done. So they document also about 10 tons of these previously molten iron microspheres, but they don't know where they came from. Well, we know where they came from. They came from these nanothermite chips. It's very clear. So the evidence is irrefutable. The experiments are repeatable. The evidence is self-corroborating, and this can put a lot of people away for a long, long time.
Well, Richard, you're spot on with all your observations, and I want to add that we've had a number of very significant fires in buildings around the world that have been much more intense. They weren't generating black smoke. They were generating literally white hot, and none of those buildings collapsed. These are the only 3 buildings in world history that have collapsed from so-called low-temperature fires and
well, these are the only
furniture fires
that they will be pursuing as well with the grand jury.
Okay, Barbara, welcome to the show, and I want to hear your thoughts. Richard did a perfect job of leading into your part of the conversation. So welcome to the show, and tell us how you are involved with this process.
Well, hi, Dan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Great, thank you so much. Richard brought me in on his cell, I believe. So the first thing I'd like to do in answer to your question is to connect to the first hour of your program, which I was fortunate enough to listen to with Eric Lawler and Chris. And the direct connection to your first hour, which is about rebirthing our nation and returning to individual sovereignty and responsibility, believe it or not, the direct connection to that of what we are doing with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is the grand jury itself. And why do I say that? The reason I say that is most Americans do not know that the federal grand juries are referenced explicitly in the Constitution of the United States, and believe it or not, Dan, a U.S. Supreme Court decision written by, of all people, the most conservative justice at the time, Anton Scalia. There is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that states explicitly that the federal grand juries are the fourth people's branch of the federal government, quote, co-equal with the courts, with the judiciary, the presidency, and the Congress, unquote. If you can believe it, federal grand juries are the fourth people's branch of government, and we, the sovereign individual American citizens, are taking back our power, and we are, as Dave Meiswinkle, the president of the Lawyers Committee, has said so well, we, the people, through our grand jury, are now inside the castle. The drawbridge has been, we got in before they brought the drawbridge up. The federal grand jury that is being convened, we have been told this by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, which is the federal jurisdiction for the World Trade Center Tower complex, including World Trade Center 7. That federal jurisdiction is convening a special criminal grand jury to investigate the true causes of the collapses of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center on 9/11. And the other major statement I wanted to make, linking this second hour of the show with your wonderful first hour of the show with Eric and Chris, is that as Chris especially, but also Eric, called your listeners to, and that is individual sovereign citizen responsibility. I'm here to tell you that being part of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and working hand in glove with Richard Gage's organization, that you are talking to 4 American citizens who have voluntarily taken up the mantle of that citizen sovereign responsibility in a huge way on behalf of all Americans. You're talking to us.
You know, that's terrific, because your comments, I think most of our listeners, at least on our network and on this program, recognize that there are a limited number of people who are willing to take up the gauntlet, to meet the challenge of being part of the solution instead of just being part of the problem. And my hat's off to you folks for doing exactly that. Richard, I've told you that but I am so pleased to hear that there is going to be a grand jury empaneled to hear what happened on 9/11, because it's time that we learn the truth. And when we do, we will realize that we have lost a tremendous amount of our national sovereignty and our local sovereignty because of the events of 9/11. And it's important that we hold people accountable for those actions.
Right. Now, Dan, I would like to defer to Dave Meiswinkle, who's the president of the Lawyers Committee, to answer your question, actually the question that Richard lobbed over to me, and that is about the Persons with Material Information supplement that we are completing and will be filing as a supplement to our grand jury petition soon. But I would like to correct something that you said in the first hour, and I'm not sure those of us on the second hour heard it. And that is, you started your show by stating, and I know that you believed it, but I just need to correct it. And that is, you said that the Lawyers Committee is Richard Gage's legal team. The reality is that we are 2 independent organizations who are working together, hand in glove, but we are sovereign, independent organizations, the Architects and Engineers and the Lawyers Committee. And what's truly historic, and part of the reason we're on your show today, is that our 2 organizations working together on this project for the first time have joined forces publicly, and we are in the middle of a fundraising drive for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry to ensure that the grand jury project achieves success. So we will be wanting to let people know how they can contribute to the Lawyers Committee on this call later. But I want to defer to Dave Meiswinkle to answer the question that Richard raised about the supplement that we are imminently going to be filing with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
I stand corrected. I didn't realize that you were totally independent group, but frankly, that's exactly what we need. We need people who are willing to act independently toward a common cause of liberty, and I'm really pleased to get to know all of you folks, because you are patriots of the first class. David, would you like to continue with the conversation? Barbara did a great job of leading into that, and please help connect the dots.
Sure. In reference to a supplement which we are preparing right now, it would be entitled Persons Who May Have Material Information Related to the Federal Crimes Reported by the Lawyers Committee. That will include people who could be witnesses, certainly, to confirm the hypothesis that controlled demolitions, bombs, and explosives were involved. And it also could include people that they may want to call in to ask questions. And we're careful to say that these people are necessarily suspects, but certainly they are people that more or less of interest in the sense that they may have information that could lead to the resolution of the various crimes we're talking about. The timetable for that is that hopefully within the near future, and when I say near future, within days, and I would be surprised if it's more than a few days, or at least a few weeks, the U.S. Attorney will get from us a sort of a map, so that the grand jurors, who many of them may not be as educated on these issues as your audience, Dan, or yourself, could have a little assistance in going and connecting the dots. Right now, we're not going to connect the dots publicly, but if you read our petition, you could see some of the areas we were concerned about in the petition, and it had to do with maybe a category such as security and how and who was in charge of security there. And because if you're going to do controlled demolitions, from my understanding, and Richard can correct me, it takes weeks, if not months, to set the charges. And these are some of the most secure buildings in the world. We'd also want to suggest that the various contractors who did work, whether it be asbestos removal or whether it be elevator work or electrical work, that at that time they had contracts to do that, they may be certainly people and or organizations they should want to talk to. But we can get more definitive in that, and it will be more definitive. Regarding the grand jury, it is a secret process, and it's done for a number of reasons. One of the things or reasons is it protects the grand jurors themselves, and also it allows the U.S. Attorney and the grand jury to deliberate and to move in a way that would be more comfortable for them and without the gaze of all too much public and sensational attention. So there is a fine line there, and as an organization, we're not completely sure as to how much we should put out to the public as far as the particular individuals that we think should be looked at. We have, each of us are in our own mind, people certainly we want to talk of, we think that they should be approached. They have the power to subpoena these people to ask them questions. They have the power to subpoena documents, whether it be contracts, or whether it be phone bills, or text messages, or emails. So they have that ability. If we're talking about a conspiracy, that means there's more than one people here. There's a connection of people. If we're talking about aiding and abetting, the same thing. So it could get a little complicated, and it's only at the beginning. So what we've done is we presented them with a theory on
David, I hate to interrupt, but we do have a commercial break. Would you hold that thought for the other side of the break, please?
Sure thing.
This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. And today my guests on the call are, on the second hour, are Richard Gage, David Wrinkle, and Barbara Honecker. And I'm not sure if Bill Jacoby made it on the call or not, but
yeah, I'm on. I don't know if you can hear me.
Excellent. So we'll get you in this conversation as well. David, you had the subpoena power and some of the other things that are part of the process of impaneling a grand jury. Go ahead and finish your thoughts on that.
Sure. And you asked about the petition reference the people of material information. And what I was saying is that we are going to present give some guidance to the grand jury and to the U.S. Attorney. We will name categories such as persons and entities that with pre-9/11 access to high-tech explosives and incendiaries. That may be one area. As I mentioned, there could be another area. It could be those who had foreknowledge of the event and or who seem to profit via stock transfers and things of that nature. That could be another area. And it'll be up to the grand jurors themselves to connect these particular individuals. We may name individuals there without naming them publicly, but we may name the categories, as I mentioned. Certainly anyone doing an investigation would want to know how it was done. And if we're talking about explosives and controlled demolition, certainly, as I mentioned, the security companies. So we may break that down a little bit for them, and it's up to them to take that lead and follow it. So that's where we are right now. This is really the beginning stages. We've asked the U.S. Attorney to allow us to present evidence to them. They haven't gotten back to us. We could take a lot of this evidence, and architects and engineers could be involved in that, and actually make presentations to the grand jury. But again, this is very early in this process. It could go for 18 months or even longer. So, but the process has begun as far as we know. And the letter that we received from the Jeffrey Berman, and it was signed by Michael Ferrara with the Elon Graf. These two fellows were the chiefs of terrorism and International Narcotics Unit. This is in the United States Department of Justice, the Southern District Court of New York, and it's at the bottom it says, very truly yours, Jeffrey Berman. And what he says, we have received and reviewed the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry submissions of April 10th and July 30th, 2018. We will comply with the provisions of 18 U.S.C. 332 as they relate to your submission. So that letter we received on November 7th. So that's not that long ago.
Right, and I want to mention to our listeners that not only are you folks involved, but part of the folks that are involved in this are people who lost family members as a result of 9/11, people who were actually in the buildings at the time, and they are also parties of this effort to find the truth. And I have to mention at this point, this isn't about, let's say, trying to define specific people who are involved. I think the inquiry to that is a matter of trying to find the truth of what really happened on 9/11 with those three buildings. Okay, Bill, I want to get you into the conversation. I know you've been listening. Tell us your part in this whole process.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to hear my colleagues speaking about this, Richard Gage and Barbara Honegger and Dave Meiswinkle. I'm a member of the board and been encouraging our work and participating in all of our meetings and strategy sessions. I'm also always interested in the context in which we fight this battle. Barbara and Dave have mentioned a kind of a metaphor that I think is very important. They spoke of our having gotten into the Capitol. She spoke about the drawbridge. We got across the drawbridge before they could pull it up. I think that's a very good description of where we are strategically right now. Now, if we were on the other side, I think one of the things we'd want to do would be to haul up that drawbridge real fast and cut off a few folks who got across early and kind of wipe them out inside the castle and make sure that reinforcements didn't arrive. And I tweaked that metaphor to call attention to another big party here, and that's people like yourself, Dan, and the many colleagues you have in the field of independent journalism. I'm sure it's been a lonely struggle for many of you, feeling that you have a small audience compared with the mass media, compared with CNN or NBC or whomever. But there has been something growing in this country in the area of independent journalism as people get turned off by the mainstream media. And there was always a question of just how and when the scales would be tipped and alternative media would become the dominant medium. Well, there's something about this process that's going on now where the crossing of that drawbridge by the lawyers, armed with the information that Richard and his team have prepared over the years, there's something that's happening which is, I think, giving a significant boost to internet media. The effort to publicize and get the word out regarding this development is really being driven by folks like yourself and shows like yourself. It was significant to me to see the other day that the word got up to one of the deans in this area, Paul Craig Roberts, who was boasted, I think correctly, that he has a bigger following. More people read his words than the New York Times. The word is really getting out, and that's where the reinforcements to cross that drawbridge and keep it open will come from. Of course, the courts are the central battleground here, but we have to wonder how it could have been that this information, which has been on the internet for so long, could be so almost perfectly excluded from mainstream media for so long. And without speculating on the hows or whys, it will be really important to overcome that. So I just wanted to underscore that with the drawbridge crossed, we can't let our crusaders who crossed the bridge be fighting this alone. And independent media has got to continue to really step up, ramp up, amplify its voice even more. And the listeners to programs like this have to also, as I suspect your listeners do, realize that they aren't passive listeners to a radio show, but rather are critical, active participants. Sovereignty really doesn't mean anything if you are going to be treated as a passive spectator sport. So there will be times in the future, and right now, as we try to bolster this campaign for your listeners to play a role. One last thing on this subject is that this is only one step, one stage, one battle in what will not be resolved by one single battle, I believe. There are strong forces arrayed against this. We can't predict exactly how the grand jury will come down because it is conducted in secret. As Dave said, for very good reasons it's conducted in secret. But that in turn sort of limits our effectiveness. So it's very important that we prepare ourselves not merely to fight this one battle with our lances and our swords, but that we be prepared for more battles, and we certainly are anticipating them and planning them. And that's why it's really important for your listeners and for independent media in general to gather behind us and make this a sustainable and sustained effort. Sometimes these struggles can go on for many years. We hope we have the years to do it, but they also go on in many venues and over many actions. And the support of your listeners and of your colleagues will go a long way to making sure that we have the strength to expand this battle and not just fight it as if it were a battle, but fight it as if it were a war.
Right.
Well, and Bill, I want to, I'm sorry, Barbara, I want to, and this is a perfect place for you to enter the conversation and tell people how they can support your effort and how they can donate.
Well, exactly. That was what I was starting to do. Thank you. And so everybody who's listening, it's extremely important to participate as sovereign American citizens in this effort. And the way that you can do that the most effectively right now is the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry have historically joined forces in a fundraising campaign that we are in right now on behalf of the Lawyers Committee. So there are two simple ways for you to donate to the Lawyers Committee's work on the grand jury petition and all the other work that we still need to do to achieve success in this ongoing process. And you can go to either website. You can go to the Lawyers Committee website, which is LC, that stands for Lawyers Committee. So the website is lcsor911.org, O-R-G, that's lcsor911.org, and it's obvious there where you can donate to the Grand Jury Petition Project, to its success, its ongoing success. And as you heard earlier on this segment of the show, that the grand jury is just being impaneled, and they can initially be impaneled for up to 18 months. So this is going to be the long haul. We need your financial support. The other way to donate to the Lawyers Committee is by going to the Architects and Engineers website. And that website is AE911truth.org. That's AE911truth.org. And it will be obvious that the banner that is right at the top that comes up first, gives you a place to just click on that banner, and you will go to a page where you can donate to the Lawyers Committee's grand jury effort that we are working in tandem, hand in glove with the architects and engineers on. So please do that. Thank you.
And Barbara, I want to mention, and of course, Richard, you know this, that I feel this way, and I think a lot of Americans do. This is potentially the best way we can fight the attempts at a one-world socialist technocratic government, and that is the way to stand up for America and our sovereignty is by supporting your efforts to expose the truth.
Absolutely, completely agree. We've got more horses to bring into the castle. Didn't use this metaphor, and we've got archers and battering rams lined up, but the attorneys have hundreds of hours yet to do on this project, and that's why we've got to support them. So please, everybody, do donate at LC for 911 Truth. Excuse me, LC for 911.org.
Okay, now I want to bring into the discussion, Richard, and you can help set the table on this, and then maybe David and Barbara and Bill can step in on that. But let's talk about the victims of 9/11. Let's talk about all the people who lost family members, all the people who saw our liberties diminish, all the people now that we seem to be fighting an endless war on terrorism that has gone on now for 18 years. Let's talk about those folks and how they're impacted by this whole process and why it's important for everyone to stand up and do something.
Well, only the truth will heal the pain and loss of the family members of the victims of 9/11. Sweeping the truth under the rug is not going to be of any help whatsoever, maybe near-term help. Getting to the root of the problem, that not just their problem, but all of our problems, we're now involved in a $6.5 trillion global war on terror. That is a lot of money. Our country is in debt on the books of $22 trillion, and there's another $20 trillion that we're becoming aware of that is also added to that debt. It is not only unsustainable, we're about to go bankrupt. These wars have bankrupted our economy. We also have, through the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, the decimation, as you mentioned in the first hour, of the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments of our of our Constitution, and any of us can now be arrested, put in jail without a right to a trial, a lawyer, a jury, not even knowing what we're charged with. We can be tortured and even assassinated. That is a complete loss of what our forefathers fought for. We've also killed 2 million people in the Middle East. As a result of what? The attack primarily on the World Trade Center. So if there's any question about what happened at the World Trade Center, then by God, it needs to be thoroughly investigated. And that's what is happening right as we speak. So I'm all about getting to the truth here and waking up the American people. As Eric Lawyer mentioned earlier in this hour, we and Christopher, we have fallen asleep at the wheel. We have allowed others to govern us, and they have their own best interests at heart, not the American people. That has become plainly obvious. So we've got to take the keys back to the Maserati, or at least pull it off the wall and send it in for repairs. We throw it away. We've got to start something new that works a whole lot better than what gave rise to these perpetrators of the demolition of our Constitution.
Right, and also in following up your question, Dan, going right to the heart of your question, your listeners need to know that about 24, a minimum of 24, as I understand it, family members who lost their loved ones on 9/11, not only in the towers but planes and some of the other attack sites. A number of the 9/11 victims' family members have signed onto the petition, and their names are with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, squarely behind us. And your listeners also may not know that in a separate legal action that's been going on for years, something like 6,000 9/11 victims' family members who lost their husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, parents, children in the World Trade Center and the other attacks of 9/11. Over 6,000 of these 9/11 victims' family members are plaintiffs in an ongoing lawsuit against Saudi Arabia that was facilitated and made possible in great part by actions by key members of our Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, including myself and Vic Harrison, who is not on this call, but he is our litigation director, and our then President Jane Clark of the Lawyers Committee. We were absolutely instrumental in finally, after 15 years, of obtaining finally the release of the famous 28 pages, which were the final chapter of the very first congressional investigation of 9/11 by the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. Both the Bush, Cheney, and Obama Biden administrations had classified those 28 pages and hidden them away for almost 2 decades. And through our vision and our work, we got them released along with the 9/11 victims' family members, the pressure by them. And finally, when the 28 pages were released, then almost immediately, the Congress of the United States, both Republicans and Democrats, if you can imagine it, initially voted unanimously. All 100 members of the Senate, all 435 members of the House, they all voted to pass the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, known as JASTA, a couple of years ago, which in turn enabled for the very first time those 6,000 9/11 victims' family members, our fellow sovereign U.S. citizens trying to get to the truth of 9/11, finally allowed their case against Saudi Arabia to move forward in the courts, which it is, as we are speaking to you, in great part because of the work of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry's members. So please, again, go to our website, which is SOR911.org, O-R-G. Donate generously, please. Help us help you to return to the vision of the Founding Fathers.
And to continue on, Bob McIlvaine, who is probably the best-known victim of family member, he accompanied us when we presented the grand jury petition to the U.S. Attorney. He went up to New York City from Philadelphia area, came up, met with us, and then after we did the presentation, we went over to the City Hall in New York, and we did a press release, our press conference, and he also addressed the gathering there. So certainly the victims' family members were involved in the grand jury petition. And in addition to that, Richard outlined, and Barbara mentioned too, a lot of the changes in our country since 9/11, whether it be the incursions into Iraq or Afghanistan, or the indefinite detention, or drones, or the Patriot Bill, NSA, etc. But what we have to realize and stress is that although we talk about the hijacking of airplanes, alleged hijacking of airplanes, on that day, our country, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution were hijacked. That was the crime. On top of the crime, our freedoms were hijacked as Americans. Our definition of who we are as Americans was hijacked. So what this petition does now is it starts to reverse the process so that we can regain the freedoms and the identity of ourselves as Americans, to realize that since 2001, 17 years, to the best of our knowledge, a grand jury has never been conducted to properly investigate the crimes of at least or nearly 3,000 people on that day, and all the people that have been killed since then as a result of those crimes is really outrageous, and it does not speak highly of our country. What will speak highly of our country is if we realize our mistakes and or our misconceptions or our being led and confused and lied to, and address that situation. And in part, now the grand jury can begin that process.
You're absolutely right. Folks, we've run out of time, but please get on board. Donate to this cause, to this fund. Become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And I want to thank you all for being our guests today. This has been a fantastic program. I will be keeping very close tabs on this, and I welcome you folks to come back again as this case proceeds forward, and we can report to our listeners what's been happening.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.